Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition, and it's an honor to have you here today. We have awesome information for you. I'd like to start by just recognizing the other officers on the line, which is Ron Browder, who is our board advisor. Lynn Stevens is the co-vice president. Barb Turpin is our secretary. And I'm missing Siobhan Jones is our treasurer. I think I covered everybody. Did I leave anybody out? No. We are excited to be here today. We trust that you had a happy new year and that you are adjusting to the many changes that's going on, not just locally, but around the country. We're excited to have an awesome presenters for you today. And I'd like to introduce our first presenter without ado, Tara Shook. Tara is with the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services. She is the section chief of substance care and permanency policy, and she is going to provide an overview of new kinship support payment programs. Without further ado, I do want to bring her on to start her presentation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. So I just wanted to give a high-level overview of the new Kinship Support Program. The Kinship Support Program was kind of born out of Senate Bill 310, which was the capital budget bill. And unlike other bills, the capital budget bill became effective upon signature. So usually when the governor signs a bill, we have 90 days before it becomes effective. But with this bill, they put an emergency clause that made it effective upon signature. So that was a little surprise to us. And it was, like I said, it was signed on December 29th. So luckily we kind of had a little head start and knew it was coming, but any break that we thought we might get over the holiday didn't happen at all. So so that was a nice little surprise for us. Senate Bill 310 was very detailed in the part about the kinship support program. Therefore, our rule that we're writing really mirrors the language from that bill. And the new rule specifically is 5101 colon 2-42-18.2. And so the new rule says that in order to receive the payments, and this is specified in Senate Bill 310, children must be in the custody of a county agency or under a subgrant agreement with a 4E agency. So those are our kids that are involved in 4E courts and DYS. So children must be placed with the kinship caregiver as a kinship placement, and that placement must be entered in SACWIS, as that entry into SACWIS is what generates the payment. The time frame for the payments, this began on December 29th, 2020. So if a child was placed prior to December 29th, the caregiver will receive 9 months of payments. If the child was placed anytime between December 29th and September 29th for that 9-month period, they will receive 9 months of payments. If a child was placed on or after September 30th, they'll receive 6 months of payments. And the time frames that we're talking about here, the initial 9 months and then then it goes down to 6 months. That time was created to allow time for that kinship caregiver to become certified as a foster parent if they choose to do so. They're not required to, but if they want to become a foster parent, that's what those time frames are for. We knew that there might be an initial rush for kinship caregivers to get certified. So that's why initially we made the 9 months of payments. And then after that initial rush, we'll go to a 6-month payment timeframe. The payments are $10.20 per day per kinship child. And they consist of entirely state GRF funds. So there's no federal funds that are being pulled down to pay for this. It's all out of state money. The payments will be per caregiver, per custody episode. So that in other words, let's just say Johnny has to be placed and he's with grandma and grandpa. Grandma and grandpa will receive the payments for 9 months. If after that time, after the 9 months are up, then for some reason, maybe grandpa's got a health concern and he has to go move in with Aunt Sally. Aunt Sally will then receive the payments for whatever time frame she's allotted at that time, which if it's after the 9 months, it would be 6 months. So Sally would receive the payments for 6 months. If the health concern was taken care of and Johnny was able to move back to grandma and grandpa's, grandma and grandpa would not get the payment again because they had already exhausted their payments in the prior earlier part of that placement episode. If something happened and say the child was able to reunify with mom and then came back into custody at some point later in time and then was placed with grandma and grandpa again, then they would be able to receive the payments again. Okay, it's all by custody episode. Okay. The Office of Family Assistance is revising their OWF eligibility rules to treat the KSP payments like they do foster care per diem payments. And what that means is that caregivers receiving the KSP payments will not be able to receive OWF child-only benefits for the same child for that same time frame. Once the KSP payments end, if the caregivers are not certified foster parents, they are welcome to apply for OWF child-only benefits at that time. Now, their rule changes are not going to be able to be in effect until probably April of 2021. So from the point of December 29th until when the rules become effective, caregivers, if they have child-only benefits at this time, would be able to receive both, because we're not going we can't implement a rule that's not in place yet, is essentially what that's about. So after April, when their rules become effective, then the caregiver would not be able to receive both at the same time for the same child. Initial payments will be generated in April and will be retroactive back to December 29th. Payments will occur monthly after that initial lump sum payment. Payments will be generated from the SACWIS system, manually from our team at first, and then within the system by June 2021. County agencies will have access to their own report of which caregivers will be receiving payments prior to those payments going out. So they all have a chance to verify the information entered in SACWIS for placements is correct. If the caregivers decide to pursue foster care certification, they will not be required to attend training. Okay, that was specifically called out in Senate Bill 310. So it states that all foster parent training is able to be waived if foster parents go for certification, or if kinship caregivers go for certification. Agencies are encouraged to utilize other waivers of non-safety requirements to remove as many barriers as possible to certification. We build a small team here at OFC to review those waiver requests as they come in, and we will review them on a case-by-case basis as each child's situation is different. If any agency assessors are not sure if the barrier they are facing is waivable, they are encouraged to reach out to myself or someone on my staff. What that means is if for some reason a foster parent or a foster parent applicant is a kinship caregiver and is wanting to become licensed as a foster parent, if there is some requirement that they are not able to meet in the foster parent requirements, then the agency is able to ask for a waiver of that requirement. We will entertain those waivers if it's a non-safety issue. So specifically, training was called out in Senate Bill 310, but there are a lot of other waivable requirements. Some of the things that Dave gets fairly often are there's a requirement that each foster child's bedroom has to have a standard size window. And, you know, depending on where the child is at that, in that home, that may not be a possibility. So that's something he gets from time to time, and he often approves those. That would be a waivable requirement. Sometimes kinship caregivers or foster parents live in older homes where you have to walk from like through one bathroom to get to a bedroom or something like that, that's a waivable requirement that we would definitely entertain. So if in doubt, we will always waive a non-safety standard so that the kinship caregivers can get approved. And just so you know, that's always been the case. Senate Bill 310 just kind of emphasized those waivers, but that's always been the case. Okay, so we're anticipating that we're going to get more requests in as time goes on now, but we've always been able to entertain those waivers, and we've always done that. Once the caregiver becomes certified, they will be paid at the same rate as if the child were placed in a non-family or a non-kin foster home. We are in the process of developing additional technical assistance documents to assist both caregivers and agencies in moving forward with this KSP program. So there is a lot more to come. We've drafted a letter to kinship caregivers that are affected by this program, and we'll be getting that out to agencies so that agencies can get the word out to their kinship caregivers, in addition to a lot of other documents to help agencies through this. So I know that was a lot of information, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I see there's one in the chat. How is this different from approval for kinship providers? Barb asked that question. Are you asking how is the foster parent certification different from?
Right, you said that now there's a blanket waiver for training requirements for the caregivers. So how does this process then differ from the approval process for kinship caregivers when they have a child placed?
Okay, so the foster care certification, the home study assessment process is a little bit more involved than what the kinship assessment process already is. For example, for foster parent certification, the applicants would need to give names of references that could be contacted. We would also contact adult children for a reference. We would have the applicants fill out a financial statement. It's just a one-page document of what bills they have, what income they have, things like that. They also have to have a medical statement completed and signed by the doctor. It's nothing. It's nothing that would. I'm trying to think of how to explain it. It's a little bit more involved than what the kinship assessment process is. But without the training is what takes up a lot of the time for people to get certified as foster parents. So without the training, it's a lot of paperwork and a couple interviews. But like I said, even if something came back on the medical statement as a concern or anything like that, these are all things that we could look at as a non-safety waiver. Okay. Explain what KSP is, please. The KSP is the Kinship Support Program. That's the payments that we've been talking about. Another question, you may have mentioned this, but I wanted to clarify, they do not need to be licensed foster parents. A kinship home study approval and placement suffices, or is there going to be a new assessment process? So in order to get the Kinship Support Program payments, the KSP payments, you do not need to become a certified foster parent. Once the child is placed in your home as a kinship placement, then that is what triggers the payment of that $10.20 per day per child. There is not a requirement. I know that's something that we had talked about in the past, and but I just want to be super clear. There is not a requirement to become a foster parent. We have made that process easier for kinship caregivers, as easy as we could possibly make it and still be in alignment with federal law, but that is not a requirement. if the kinship caregiver gets the 9 months of payments and or the 6 months of payments after the September 30th date, then in order to, if for some reason they don't want to apply for OWF child only benefits, if they want to continue getting payments, then they would need to become foster parents.
Okay, we're gonna cover the last two questions, then we're gonna move on to the next presenter.
Okay. Let's see. Once placed on foster status, is the status indefinite as long as the child is with the relative? So once you're a foster parent and that child is placed in your home as a foster child, then that placement would continue as long as the agency, if the agency is working towards reunification or working towards permanency, whatever the case may be. We still have those permanency options. They could still talk to the relative about permanent custody or legal custody, or going the route of permanent custody and adoption. It would be up to the agency and the relative at that point. Is the training waiver just for pre-service training or for ongoing training as well? It's for all of training. How do I apply for the KSP? There is no application. Once that placement is entered as a kinship placement, you will receive it automatically. There's no application that's required. Is there support for informal caregivers in the current legislation? So Senate Bill 310 included the payments as I've outlined in this presentation, but there was no mention in Senate Bill 310 specifically about kinship caregivers who are informal receiving these payments.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
As you can see, we have much work to do to ensure that the kinship providers receive the supportive services that they need. We know that in Ohio, there's 200,000 grandparents raising grandchildren. That does not count for the aunts, the aunties, the godparents. That's just the grandparents. So we still have much work to do. So thank you so very much. Our next speaker is Barb Turpin. Barb Turpin is she's our secretary with the coalition. She's also an expert in the field of kinship care. A lot of background, a lot of training in it, and a lot of work in it. And so we want to give her the opportunity to give an update on the Kinship Foster Care Payments Ohio lawsuit. Thank you, Barb.
Thanks, Dr. Jones, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry you can't see my face because my camera's not working, so you'll just have to use your imaginations as to what I look like. I'm going to give an update about the current lawsuit that's been filed against Governor DeWine and the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services for the kinship foster care payments that came out of an original lawsuit that was filed in 2017, the Glisson lawsuit, which I think a lot of people have heard about, that was filed, and it went through the system and was found in favor of implementing these payments. I want to, though, first clarify who would be eligible for these payments once that program was implemented in Ohio. Again, like Tara said, that it's a small population of caregivers who would be eligible based on the eligibility requirements of the law. These would be families, again, who have children placed through the Public Children's Services Agency. That agency has custody and has placed with the approved relative. And so these would be the families that would be impacted by this payment. Again, it's the smaller group of formal placements rather than the informal group. And we know we have a lot of work to do to get supports for the informal group, but this is one thing that we can at least pursue to get more help to the formal custody placed children. So this lawsuit in Ohio was filed on November 19th of 2020, which was last year. And it's filed based on the facts that Ohio is in violation of the federal law by failing to provide kinship foster payments to the approved relatives with children placed in their homes. And these payments would be equal to what foster care of the non-relative foster care, licensed foster caregivers would get. So in contrast to what Tara was talking about with this current kinship support payment program, which is capped at $10.20 a day, the payments that would be paid to these families based on this lawsuit would be equal to what the foster care parents would get for the placement of that child in a home. So there would be no cap. It would be what that county pays based on that child's needs in that foster home as to what the kinship parents would receive. This lawsuit is based out of the Glisson lawsuit that was decided through the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals back in 2017. So we're way behind. This lawsuit affects several states, including Ohio. Michigan is another one. Kentucky is one. And right now, Ohio's out of compliance. The plaintiffs of the lawsuit, which are several kinship caregiver families, have filed a motion for a preliminary injunction. They did that in December, and which that means is they're asking for the court to do a preliminary relief that the Ohio system is unlawful and that foster care maintenance payments to approved kinship families should start immediately. And the basis for this is it's not only federal regulations, but kinship caregivers provide the same services as licensed foster parents. And because of this, they are sorely in need of that same financial support. A lot of families are taking in children where they don't have that financial safety net. And so they are struggling to take care of the children that they're taking in. Especially in the Black families who are taking in a disproportionate number of children in the state, and they are taking on additional responsibilities for those children. And so there's a feeling like there is a disproportional representation of these families getting the support overall. And right now, the response from the department as well as Governor DeWine is that they feel the program that Tara just finished talking about, the Kinship Support Program, fully addresses the plaintiff's claim, and the approved kin are not treated, but that the approved kin are not being treated equally in the KSP program, with that cap on with the $10.20, and then the time frame that payment is limited. And then if the families want to continue to receive payment, then they have to become licensed rather than go through the approval process. So the KSP program really doesn't meet the spirit of the lawsuit that was won in the Glisson case. And so this is why it was necessary to file a lawsuit in Ohio. There is a hearing that is scheduled. Actually, it's scheduled for tomorrow before the judge regarding that preliminary injunction, which is requiring that the payments be implemented immediately. And the plaintiffs have also requested the case be decided as a class action, which would mean that all children in this population would be approved for the kinship care payments. So right now, the issue of whether it's going to be heard as a class action hasn't been taken up by the court, but at least tomorrow they'll be addressing the preliminary injunction request. And that's pretty much all I have right now. Hopefully after tomorrow, I'll get more updates from the attorneys and be able to pass that along to everybody. I'll see if there's any questions. And I don't see any. But if you have any after this, you can email me and I'll try to get you some answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. As you can see, we have much to do in the state of Ohio when it comes to providing those needed services for kinship care providers. We are not where we need to be, but we're fighting on behalf of those to get us there. Thank you again. Let me just say that I want to also to refer you to our website for our previous monthly meetings that we've had. So you can go to that website and you can put, they are being recorded and you can review those. We ask that you let other folks know about the monthly monthly meetings that we're having, so that they can also become a part of the process. At this time, we have an awesome speaker. I've known her for years, when she was involved with Generation United. Anna Beltran. Anna Beltran is an attorney, and prior to moving to West Coast as the director of the National Center of Grandparents, Anna is a national expert on grand families. She has various publications through Generation United on the various issues of kinship care. Anna is a special advisor to the president of Generation United. Anna also has spoken about relatives raising children at the national, state, and local level at various conferences. She's well known. Her name is well known. I know in DC, when I go to the various conferences and meetings, they know her presence is always there in some form. As someone who was raised in part by her grandmother, she has a personal commitment to advocate, educate, and teach and train those on kinship care and on what's needed for that population. At this time, without further ado, Anna Beltran.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones.
So good to see you.
And good to see you. It's such a pleasure to join you all today again. I see a lot of familiar faces, or at least I see the names of a lot of familiar faces, which is great. I am going to share my screen with you and some slides that I've put together. I've been asked to give you kind of an overview of what's happening right now at the federal level. And it's an exciting time because because of the pandemic, which isn't so exciting, but it is creating an opportunity to really elevate grand families, which is the term we use for kinship families. So we use those two terms interchangeably to mean grandparents, aunts and uncles, and other close family friends, so godparents and the like who raise children. But what we're seeing is well, there's about Generations United, but you all know about me, so I will just pass through that one. But we've had a National Center on Grand Families for over 20 years. And actually, Dr. Jones, I have now become the co-director of the center. So I'm no longer a special advisor, I'm now full-time, which is just as of January 1. So it's a real pleasure to be back full-time with them. The COVID pandemic has really provided an opportunity to elevate kinship families and grand families with federal lawmakers, because kinship families have existed for decades, centuries, and the pandemic is really heightening the needs that have been there all along, right? All the inequities. I mean, I don't need to tell you all, you're the true experts. You're the ones who live it and live with it. And I honor you. But it is providing an opportunity to really say, hey, there are all these kinship families. There are 2.7 million children around the country being raised by relatives, and their needs during this pandemic are heightened and they're very serious. And you need to make sure that you include them explicitly in all forms of COVID relief. And because of the pandemic, there is more of a focus on children and families, which is good at the federal level, but there's a lot of work to be done. But we're really trying to elevate the particular needs of kinship families. And as you all know, what really distinguishes grandparents and other relatives from parents is that relatives don't have the inherent legal rights and responsibilities over those children. And without that legal rights and responsibilities, it's very hard to access services and supports for the child. So there's also that original legal hurdle, right? And you can get legal custody, you can get all these things, but it's another hurdle that parents don't have. Also, parents plan and expect to be raising children. For grandparents and other relatives, you may get them overnight, right? It may be There's no time to plan. You were going on a cruise tomorrow and suddenly you're raising children again. So all those two are the really big distinctions that we try to elevate with the federal lawmakers. Also, a significant portion of kinship families are the very people that are more prone to getting sick or dying from COVID, over age 60, Black, Latino, Native American, disabled. I mean, these are a lot of the same characteristics. And so we really are trying to elevate those special needs that kinship families have. And of course, all the many, many strengths that we really do want to place children with relatives when it's possible and support them. So at the very end of December, it didn't look like it was going to happen there, as you all, I'm sure you all who watch too much cable news with me saw, but the Consolidated Appropriations Act was signed into law at the end of December, and it included some pandemic relief as well. And I just want to elevate with you all kind of what that did for kinship families and grand families. So one of the things that really surprised us was that there's $5 million in the Appropriations Act for legacy. Now, I don't know how many of you all remember the Legacy Act, but it is an act that we worked hard to get enacted in 2003. And then there was some money appropriated for it in 2008. And it created some affordable housing opportunities for families in 3 places, in Tennessee and Chicago, and one other place that is escaping me right now. And it also did some training of HUD workers on the unique issues that grand families face. But it hadn't been, no money had gone towards it in 13 years. And all of a sudden, $5 million is there. So it's not a lot, but it's a big statement. And the good thing about this is it's to expand the availability of housing. So those kinds of housing that we've talked about together as a group before, and I know you have some in Cleveland, where there's services and supports on site for the families. So kinship families live together, there's support groups, there's homework support, there's playgrounds, and you know, it's a real community. So there'll be $5 million more to develop more of this housing. And the good thing about this coming through the federal law is that this housing comes with Section 8 project vouchers, which is really important because that keeps rent at 30% of income for everyone who lives in the building. So it's a real way to build some new affordable housing. And there are about 20 of these around the country, not all of which were developed with legacy. Most weren't, including Plaza West in Washington, D.C., which you've got a picture of here. But this will elevate it and increase some housing supply. So we were excited to see that. We had done a little work around it, but frankly, it was a really good news that kind of caught us off guard. What didn't catch us off guard, because Generations United have been working hard on this, was more Kinship Navigator program support. And I know, you know, that in Ohio you have a program that's being developed and that you've, you know, been in touch with them about it. And it's, you know, I've heard that it's not, many of you are a little bit disappointed with it. And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but, you know, they are such important programs when they work well for connecting caregivers and the children they raise with services and supports. Because as we know, there are just so many systems that impact the families. So aging, education, child welfare, the rest of it. So these programs are really meant to navigate all those systems. And when they work well, they work really well. So we were able, and I say we, federal advocates, were able to get a 4th year of $20 million, 19 million of which goes out to the states. They don't have to compete for it, but they do have to apply for it. And Ohio's gotten it every year. There's a current 20 million that Ohio's operating under now. They got about, I can't remember exactly, but it's based on population. It's probably around 300, 400,000. And that pot of money is going on right now. And then there'll be another 20 million next year. Like I said, so that's the 4th year. But then the really exciting piece is that because of the pandemic again, the federal government has said that 100% of Kinship Navigator costs are reimbursable by the federal government, dating back to April of last year through September of this year. And those programs don't have to be evaluated. They don't have any of those evaluation requirements that have been really hanging up Navigator programs, because there aren't any that are approved yet as fully evaluated. So they don't have to be evaluated, but they have to be kind of in the process or thinking about an evaluation, or, you know, assure the feds that they're going to do it. But that can cover all kinds of things, that 100%. So the funding requirements are a little bit different. And I'm just going to walk you through this because I think it's important that you all know from an advocacy perspective, you know, in Ohio, that you can go to your Kinship Navigator program and say, hey, you can do this. Will you do this? You know, and let them know what your needs are as much as you can. So like I said, there are those 2 pots of money from 2020 and 2021. And there were same money in 2018, 2019. Ohio's gotten it for the 3 years. I'm sure they'll apply for the 4th year. And that money can be used for everything from very initial planning through evaluation. The pandemic relief money is a little different, but it's not really an issue in Ohio. But you've got to have already a Kinship Navigator program in place. So you're doing something. But you don't have to be evaluated yet. You all just have to provide assurance that you will be, or in the process of being evaluated. And there's a link there for the law itself, which is a monster. It's, I don't know, over 1,000 pages, but there's a little summary of it there too. And you'll get these slides after, so you can have all the links. But what's important is the expenses that these federal funds can cover. So it's program costs, you know, it's their staffing, it's evaluation, it's all that. But it's also, and a lot of Kinship Navigators don't do this. And again, I could be speaking out of turn, and I want Ron to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe Ohio does a lot of direct goods and services. Is that right, Ron? I don't want to put you on the spot, but you know,
I think that's true, but Patrick is on the line, and I think Patrick Donovan is the navigator for the Montgomery County area, I believe. So Patrick, could you address that? Because I did hear that there were some minimum monies that could be given to families, but I didn't think there was much.
I think you're on mute, Patrick.
Yep, you're right. I was on mute. Anna, good to see your face.
Good to see you, Patrick.
Hey, could you repeat the question for me, please?
Yeah, so the Kinship Navigator program in Ohio, is it doing much in terms of direct goods, like concrete goods, like gas cards and grocery gas vouchers, groceries, that kind of thing?
When you're saying Kinship Navigator, there's a couple of different programs. So we've got the one in, it's actually Muskingum County, that I've been overseeing for quite some time, and we, through Protect Ohio, which is no more, that's kind of evolved into the Ohio CAN program, which is statewide. But when we were Protect Ohio, we were doing some of those hard goods like utilities, gas vouchers, and are actually still able to do some of those to some degree. But I know that, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it looks like we've got Veronica Burrows on the phone and or on this call, and I think she'd probably be able to elaborate a little bit on Ohio CAN, which is a statewide Kinship Navigator program. So you're looking, you know, it's Muskingum County has a county-specific Kinship Navigator program for kinship caregivers that reside in Muskingum County, but the Ohio Kinship and Adoption Navigator program is for the entire state. So again, I can say that from a county level, we are able to assist with some of those hard goods. And I do think that the Ohio Kinship and Adoption Navigator program also, I know that they do have some level of flexible funding that's able to help with those sorts of things as well.
Okay. Well, that's good news, because some states aren't. And I know, you know, you've been doing, well, you and Richland County and several counties, right, really kind of never gave up kinship navigation, which is great. And then you have that robust state program that's getting off the ground. But a lot of Kinship Navigators don't do any of that direct goods and services, and they've been really reluctant to do so. So we like to elevate this because the feds have been very specific. They were specific even before this legislation, this law that came out in December. But to me, it was always clear, it's in the Fostering Connections Act, that this is a permissible use of the expenses of the federal funds. And so some states were doing it, but some states were scared. But it's important to know that the funds can be used for those kinds of things. So transportation vouchers, groceries, laptops, all kinds of help for the families in this time and beyond this time. So it's really, that's not limited to the pandemic era. Now, what the Pandemic Act does call out specific COVID responses. So that 100% reimbursement back to April is available also for any COVID testing, any COVID treatment, and that legal help for creating alternative care plans. And by that, we mean, we know that a lot of grandparents and other relatives don't have a plan for the children in the event they die or become disabled. Why? Because it's really hard. You know, as a parent, I can name a guardian in my will very easily. But if I hadn't, birthed my child or adopted my child, I couldn't do that. So how do you make those plans if you haven't adopted the grandchild or the other relative child? There are ways, but it's tricky. So this allows for some legal help for that, which is so important, especially now and, with the pandemic raging. I'm going to share this email that went out. It's a lot of words here, but just so that you know, the specific question was asked and answered by the Children's Bureau, which is the federal agency that oversees all these Kinship Navigators and the money that they get, including the statewide one in Ohio. So, can Kinship Navigator funds be used to provide short-term support like bus tokens, gas vouchers, grocery store gift cards, cell phones? And the answer is yes. There's some restrictions around the technology, there's some very, bureaucracy hoops, but it is available, and Ohio and other states can get all of that reimbursed back to April through September. And then going forward, if they kind of merge it as part of their program and they get evaluated and get into that clearinghouse, and the federal government says, yes, you meet evidence-based standards, then they can continue to infinity in getting 50% of all their costs reimbursed. That's part of a law that passed a couple of years ago. So there's a real opportunity here for Kinship Navigator programs around the country to do more, and the feds are eager to help, and we're eager to help. So, know that they're advocates at the federal level that want to make these advances and help more families. The Children's Bureau, which again is that kind of federal agency that oversees state child welfare agencies, and then the kinship money comes down through them. So to your statewide Kinship Navigator, that's where they get the money from. And so this federal agency, which is in Health and Human Services, they put out a lot of guidance in the last year. They were really busy doing a lot of good things. And so these are all links. They're links to these guidance in all three here. You just click onto the title. But the first one is really interesting and important that they did this. But they've told every state child welfare agency that it is really important that the families that you serve be included in all aspects of child welfare system reform. That means meaningfully and authentically engaging birth parents, kinship caregivers, older youth in all that they do, and that you be part of advisory groups, that you be consulted as a caregivers, that your voice be at the table. We're doing that more and more at Generations United. As you know, we have this national network of caregiver advocates, and it's been huge in our own work. And it's so amazing with policymakers, with the media. I mean, the stories that that caregivers bring to the table are what really move the needle in terms of policy change, in terms of opinion change, really hearing from families. It's what makes it real. And they're emphasizing the importance of that. And that doesn't mean just, you know, sharing your story a one-off. No, really listening to what your ideas are, what the families need for services and supports, and what needs to happen. It also gets into the preference, the federal preference that's existed for 25 years now for placing children with relatives, that's the first preference. And if children have to be removed from their parents, these agencies should be looking for relatives first. And it gets into the reasons why. And the why is tons of research that show that these children thrive better if they're with relatives than if they're with non-relatives. So there's a lot of support, and there's some guidance in there, and it's actually quite hands-on and practical and useful. The second piece, is that some states, and I know Ohio doesn't do this, or I don't believe Ohio does this, is there's a provisional licensing period on the way to becoming fully licensed as a relative foster parent. And a lot of states, they don't pay the caregivers, the relatives during that provisional licensing period. They don't get them any foster care maintenance payments. And now the federal government's saying, you can use our money to do this. It's important to do this. And this is how to do this. So that's a huge piece. And then finally, at the very end of December, out came some examples and some guidance about how to improve supports from kin through better foster care licensing work, standards and practices, and through these guardianship assistance programs. And it gets into some specific state examples. So those are 3 helpful tools. So what are we continuing to do? Well, there's a lot of work to do, as we all know, right? At the federal, at the state level, everywhere. And we have at Generations United created a transition memo to the Biden administration around issues of kinship families and what we want to see them do. And that is available on our website at gu.org. And also there's a lot of effort being done, a lot of work being done on Capitol Hill with the Congress, really trying to make more equity. Because as we all know, and I know you know in Ohio better than most, is that there's really a lot of inequity in support, not only outside the foster care system, but also inside the foster care system. And why are these children that all basically look the same, but maybe raised by a relative instead of a non-relative, not getting any support? It makes no sense. And this whole notion of not paying family to care for family, well, that's absurd. You know, caregivers are stepping up at a time they didn't expect to raise children. There's not many of us who could take on another child without more income, maybe Jeff Bezos, but you know, most of us budget what we have for who we have in the house, right? So it's a huge ask not to support the families and the children. So what we're asking for is that the new administration issue clear guidance that clarifies that approval of a kinship provider is the same thing as licensing a kinship provider. I don't think this needs congressional action because the Title IV law of the Social Security Act has always used the 2 terms interchangeably. And that's what your D.O. v. Gleason decision said. You know, that if you're approving relatives, you're going through this process, that is licensing them, and you need to pay these families and these relatives and support these children. So what we'd like to see is the Gleason decision become law of the land and that it be enforced, because it's, you know, everybody's not paying any attention to it right now. So really making clear that one is the other and that it becomes the law of the land. Because what we do know is that there are about 132,000 children with relatives around the country in kinship foster care, and most of them don't get a foster care maintenance payment. So this would address some of that inequity within the foster care system. So wish us luck. We'll be doing, I'm sure we'll be calling on you for help too. Increasing and improving the licensing of kin. So while, we're kind of attacking it on two sides, right? So if that first thing works, then we don't need the second thing. But we'll keep working on this too. And that is that that we continue to encourage the use of waivers of non-safety licensing standards for kin. So the federal government has told all states, hey, you can waive anything that's not safety. And the states can decide what's safety or what's not safety. So really the only thing they can't waive under federal law is what's known as the Adam Walsh criminal barriers. So basically, if someone was a violent felon, had committed a violent felony, had killed someone, or had some kind of drug-related offense felony within the last 5 years, just 5 years, they're barred from being a foster parent. That's under federal law. So honestly, anything beyond that, states can waive, and they can license more relatives. But a lot of states do not use those waivers very effectively or at all, or they keep them kind of secret, or their process is totally unclear. Who approves these? Oh, it's one guy in 4 counties over. So really encouraging the use of those. Amending the national family foster home licensing standards, and you all will remember those. They came out as after Family First Act through the Children's Bureau, and they had basically, the national model is based on a NARA model, which we developed with the American Bar Association, with NARA. NARA is a national association of, it's a volunteer association of people who actually license foster homes. So really the on the ground people. And we worked hard with them on really making standards that we thought really provided more of a common sense pathway to licensing more relatives and non-relatives, and doing away with standards that made no sense, like having to own a car, having a certain amount of square footage, having to have enough income to take on the child without looking at the foster care maintenance payment, really kind of breaking down some of those wealth barriers that were just not had anything to do, they didn't have anything to do with the safety of the child. And there are 2 standards that the national model didn't take from the NARA model, not because they said they disagreed with them, but just because they considered them outside their scope. But one of them is assessing those crimes that go beyond those felonies that are barred, those service barrier crimes under Adam Walsh. So, what do you do if you do a background check on a grandma and she shoplifted 10 years ago? How do you assess that? So this gives standards for that kind of thing, instead of just saying, grandma, you shoplifted, you could never, be a foster parent to your kin, which is absurd. And also the provisional emergency licensing standards, they didn't take those. And that's a real pathway to getting more kin licensed as foster parents. So I know this is a lot of kind of child welfare focus right now, but there's also, we at Generations United and a lot of national advocates really do focus on those outside the system as well, because we know that for every 1 child in foster care with a relative, there are 20 outside of foster care with a relative nationally. So there's important work to do outside the system too. But child welfare tends to be somewhere where there's just such obvious inequity and there's such a, well-defined group of children that we can kind of tackle it and then move on to the bigger issues, the more families. One other thing that we can do within the child welfare realm of kinship foster care is implement guardianship assistance programs in Ohio. So these are programs that are just for kin. They're for children who are being raised by licensed kin, and it gives them a pathway to exit foster care with their licensed kin. The kin becomes their guardian, and they continue to get up to the foster care maintenance payment rate per month until they, become 18 or 21 in certain cases, and they get to keep their Medicaid. So it's a federal option that has existed for now over 10 years. Most states have taken it. It really provides an important pathway for children with kinship caregivers within child welfare who want to leave the system but can't leave the system without some assistance. And the only other pathway is adoption. And a lot of kin don't want to adopt. They don't want to change grandma to mom, mom to sister, and all of those things. So this gives a lot of families a pathway. And Ohio has not taken this option yet. So there is work to be done. And a lot of states that have taken it aren't using it to the full capacity too. So there's a lot of work to be done on this as well. Now, in terms of outside the system, so all the families that are not caring for children in child welfare, and honestly, even some that are caring for children in child welfare, because a lot of times relatives, and I know this happens in Ohio, get referred to TANF, to Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, instead of getting that foster care maintenance payment rate. So really getting TANF support is important. So the Biden administration is asking for another $1 billion in TANF support. And again, this is the opportunity that COVID's posing, you know, that they're kind of coming alive to the notion that there are families out here that need support. And so we're using it as an opportunity to educate the feds about how kinship families, one of the primary purposes of TANF is to keep children with relatives in their care. So how do we help these families more? So we're going to make sure we're up front and center to make sure that grand families are explicitly called out in TANF relief, you know, because a lot of times these bills will just say parents or children, and they don't specifically call out kin, and kin don't see themselves in that, you know, family, just generic families or kin language. So really calling them out to make it quite clear to everyone involved that they are an important family structure to support. So we're asking that the grant amounts be increased, you know, that people get more money in hand, that the TANF child only support, as you know, for the first child, it's, you know, a certain amount, and then it goes down, well, it only rises incrementally for each additional child. So by the time you get to big sibling groups, there's not much support at all. So a lot of those families who are raising, kinship families who are raising a lot of siblings, have to go into the foster care system because this just is not enough support. So really encouraging states to do child only, like they do foster care maintenance payment rates, that it's per child, that each child gets the same amount of support, like foster care works. So we'll keep working on that. That good cause exemption. So there is this thing under federal law that you have to assign the right to collect child support to the state, and the state can then go after the parent for child support. But there's a good cause exemption for that. You know, grandma can come up and say, you know, I'm really afraid that the father will come and beat us all up if you make me sick, if you make me assign child support to you. And so we want to highlight this good cause exemption, but also expand it so more people can get it, because we know that a lot of caregivers, it's not like they're afraid of violence, but they don't want to sick the state on the parent who's trying to get their act together and reparent. So it can be as simple as that reason, and we want to make sure that that exemption is broad enough to include that kind of situation. Also eliminating asset limits. So here's what we found is that, you know, to qualify for TANF, a lot of times you can only have a certain amount of assets. Well, for older caregivers, if they've got retirement accounts, that should be exempt from looking at eligibility. So really making sure we get rid of those asset limit tests. And then elevating all these promising practices that happen around the country. And so making sure that more caregivers can get, particularly the TANF child only, which is just based on the income of the child and just for the child. And that's monthly assistance until the child is an adult. There's a link here for some more information about this, but we're really working hard on this. And this is such an important piece for us because we really want to see, you know, the much greater numbers of children and families outside of foster care be supported. And honestly, you know, all the services and counseling and support groups in the world don't make up for basic needs. You know, families need money and they need nutrition support and housing and the rest. So really getting to those basic needs. Enhancing data collection. So, sometimes when I hear data, I hear let's study it or let's do a report. It just sounds like an excuse for not doing anything. But we really do know that there's a lack of data, a lack of rich data on the families, both inside and outside foster care. So we really want to see more specific data collected on those families, those kinship families outside of foster care. So what we do know, we have quite a bit of information on the grandparents and the grandchildren they raise. We have almost nothing on aunts and uncles, siblings, godparents, and the children they raise. So, and then we also don't know how the demographic data like poverty correlates with race. So how many of the children who are in kinship care are poor? We know that, but how many of those poor children are Black? How many of those poor children are Latino? I mean, that would really help with advocacy, and we don't have that. And on the foster care side, we also don't have much racial data. We have kind of the overall race data, but we don't know within these categories, right? So it will tell us a lot about how families are treated. And, anecdotally, I see it all the time. Like I was doing focus groups with a different state. I won't say which. And it was really telling because the victim kin in these focus groups were all white, and they were, policemen, kind of middle-class folks, doing fine. And then and they were all getting foster care payment rates for the victim kin they were raising. So like the neighbors and the godchildren. And then the Black grandmothers on the focus groups were getting nothing. And so I think it's going to tell us important information that we kind of know anecdotally already, but we don't have data. So really elevating that and getting to that, and then making plans for addressing it. So we put out 2 toolkits over the summer, and these toolkits are meant for serving the families. So they're not for the families themselves, although each one has a chapter on resources which can be helpful to the families. Where to go for college scholarships if you're raising a Black a teenager, that kind of thing. But it also, it's primarily meant to educate those agencies and community providers who serve these populations, but don't really know much about the population. And so to really kind of educate them and share all the strengths that both groups really have. And there's just amazing strengths and that are elevated in both toolkits, and really compelling historical information too about how bad African Americans and Native Americans have been treated. And a lot of us, especially my age, especially with the Native American community, I mean, a lot of that I was never taught in school. So they're really educational pieces to help helpers in these agencies serve the families better. And within those toolkits, we elevate the disproportionality of the Native American children and African American children being raised in grand families. And when you see this, you kind of have to scratch your head and say, well, maybe this is why the families, kinship families in general, are so inequitably treated, whether inside or outside the foster care system. So, maybe if we can elevate this real issue, we can address it and make sure that all kinship families, regardless of race, are treated with equity and with respect and with services and support to make sure that those children thrive. And then a few other really wanting sharing promising practices and supporting through other programs as well. As I know you do in Ohio, you have some amazing area agencies on aging that provide supportive services like counseling and support groups to grandparents and other relatives age 55 plus who are raising children. And a lot of those AAAs, we call them, also serve younger caregivers with other pots of money. So they don't usually turn people away. And that is some advances were made in 2020, including up until 2020, only 10% of that program, that national program, could be used for kinship. And now there is no cap on it. So really AAAs can respond to the needs of the community. And that's where local advocacy comes in, you know, and letting them know that, hey, we're here, we need help, we've got families and the rest of it. And we want to see a National Grand Families Technical Assistance Center really supported by the feds so that we can kind of oversee all of the advances and really elevate a lot of these best practices so that families around the country can be better supported. Now, as you all know, because Patrick's a member and Dr. Tony's a member, there's a federal council to support grandparents raising grandchildren, and they're working on a lot of these issues as well, and they're trying to compile them and make recommendations, and there's a report to Congress that's underway. And there's more information here, and I'm sure they've told you, and you know, Patrick and Tony have told you a lot about this and how to make your voices heard. And Tony, do you have, do either one of you have anything to share about the council and how it's going? Well, I don't want to put them on the spot because I didn't tell them I would, but I've heard good things.
I think there's just been a lot of progress over the last several months. You know, the focus of this group initially was to try and come up with some recommendations for kinship families in regards to the opiate epidemic. So that's what the focus was. And then, of course, during the progress of the council, the pandemic hit. So then there was a huge shift from the opiate epidemic to, you know, what can we do for these families that are you know, going through this pandemic when the kids are home. Or we're also seeing whereas kids were coming into kinship care because of maybe mom and dad's issues. Now we're seeing parents that are coming down with COVID that are hospitalized and sometimes not making it. So we've got kids that are going into kinship care due to the pandemic. So our focus shifted significantly, but nonetheless, I think we've come together. And I know if you go on to acl.gov, you can get a lot of really good resources in regards to kinship caregivers and some of the resources that have been put together that anybody that's caring for a relative or a kinship child can get on there and look at those. So I would encourage anybody to do that. We've made, I think, a lot of progress, like I said, over the last, what's it been, a year and a half now?
Yeah, a year and a half. Mm-hmm.
Something like that. We've come up recently with 22 recommendations that just been a lot of work, a lot of really good people around the table as far as expertise in kinship. I know Anna Jaya has been integral in getting a lot of those committees put together and making sure that we're able to meet. So we've got a long ways to go, but I think we're making a lot of progress.
That's great. And you're so right, Patrick. I mean, the opioid crisis kind of just, you know, the pandemic they kind of all came together, didn't they? As a matter of fact, I have to talk to West Virginia Public Radio this afternoon, and their focus, you know, they've been saying that the opioid epidemic is actually kind of increasing there. They're seeing more issues because, you know, of course, the pandemic is posing all kinds of mental health issues as well, right? And so people are turning to substances. Anyway, there are a lot of issues to address and a lot of support that needs to happen. So keep up the good work. I just wanted to share a few additional resources before I turn it over to you all to ask any questions you have. You know, I've shared this with you before, but we have a grandfamilies.org website where we kind of try to keep everything that's happening at the national level on there. And it's a wealth of resources that honestly needs a little bit of an edit, but it's got a lot on there. We do try to keep it up to date. Our website at gu.org also has a lot of resources, including that transition memo that I talked about. So feel free to use that resource. On the gu.org website, we have some handouts, some kind of practical information on COVID-19 resources for kinship families in English and Spanish. Now, we also have a fact sheet for every state in the country. And the idea behind these fact sheets is that they have program information, so programs that directly serve the families and how to contact, and what's the website, and who's the phone, what's the phone number, and really practical stuff. And then it has kind of a all the federal programs that exist and the state contact information for those. Anyway, we're in the process of updating all 51 of them. And if you all wouldn't mind, I would ask that you take a look at the fact sheet as it exists right now and see what we're missing. You know, if your program's listed correctly, if you want any edits, if there are programs that just aren't on there or have gone away, that would be really amazing to get your input on that, because that process is underway. And then we're hosting a webinar on these implications for kinship families from this new law that passed in December. And we're going to be joined by Children's Defense Fund and ABA Center on Children's Law. So if you would like to join that webinar, it's free. And as I said, you'll have these slides, so you can click on all these links. And then here, there's a link where you register for that webinar. You need to register in advance. And then it'll give you it's a Zoom as well. So it'll give you the Zoom link. And then there's my contact information, my new title. And please, you know, consider us a resource. Feel free to reach out anytime. It's always a pleasure to talk with you all. I miss meeting in person. I really enjoyed our October, what was it, 2019 conference. I learned so much during that conference, and it was a great one. So hopefully we'll be seeing each other in person again someday soon. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try to address them. I can't see the chat box, so if somebody sees anything in chat, it's just because of the way this is set up on my end. But well, reach out anytime, you know, just email me and I'm happy to answer anything. But it's been a pleasure to join you all today.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you for that wealth of information that we need as we continue to provide services for kin families and the children that they serve. I'm going to ask that question again. Are there any questions you have for Anna while she's here? Any questions? I know it's a lot of information.
It is a lot of information. And I'm happy to, you know, talk more or answer more specific questions, you know, as they arise.
It's important that we continue to advocate for more services for kinship care providers. The Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition, as an advocacy support and navigator services that we provide around the state of Ohio. You know, we get so many different calls and issues and concerns. And so we know the need continues to grow, not just in Ohio, but around the country, but in Ohio, the need grows. So I don't know if Ron or Barb or anyone have anything that they want to add to the discussion.
Well, I would just say that, you know, what Anna, and you did a wonderful job. It was really wonderful, and we appreciate it each time you come. I think what Anna outlined from a national standpoint is very much what we are going to be looking at the state level as well. So, you know, we're very focused on what's happening with the Glissom case and making sure that families are able to access dollars to help support them and services they need. We are somewhat, Anna did talk about it a little bit. We are looking at the Navigator program. So there are some challenges and I think opportunities. And so at the state level, the coalition and its partners that are represented on this call, as well as Federation and other partners, are going to really be looking to try and make sure that we are addressing the issues, not only of those who have children who are in the custody of agencies, but that broader group that Anna talked about. And Anna, I'm so glad to hear that Generations United is making a fight around the TANF, because I do think that's where we can begin to try and get our legislators to understand that it does make sense that rather than doing an incremental based on children, that there is a per child amount for children, and that would help families immensely. Just that alone would help families. And so we are glad that y'all doing that, and we will be ready to help you all in any way we can. But we do appreciate everything you've said today, and I think the families should know that they are in good hands from the national level.
Thank you both.
There
And
is,
if, also I'd like to turn the question back to you all too. If there's something that you're seeing that we're not doing, we'd love to hear that too. And you're free to email me, as things come up. But we're looking at SNAP as well, at food stamps, and trying to improve that access for grant families. So there are a few other things in the works, but if some specific ideas come out, please reach out.
Child care is also an issue for eligibility for working caregivers, because it is again tied to their resources for eligibility.
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah.
and there are two questions. One question is, is there any help for fictive kin? Someone typed in.
So, such a good question. And it really comes down to what the states say. So some states include fictive kin in TANF and include them as possible, in the definition of relative. Some states don't. Most states don't, but some do. And I can share a list of those states so that you can see kind of how you can advocate for their inclusion in Ohio, because I don't believe Ohio does include fictive kin in TANF, right? Okay, because there are ways to do it. And a number of states do it. So, and that might be something also that we could try to tackle at the federal level, although traditionally how it's been done is like, even with GAP, Guardianship Assistance, the feds say relative, and then they leave it to the state to define relative any way they want. So some states, most states define relative for GAP purposes as including fictive kin, but some don't. So it's a good question, and the answer is it depends.
Another question is, I have my grandson since he was born, and he's 8, and never received any monetary assistance because my daughter was in the home, and at the time she was a minor. Is there any way of me receiving any assistance now?
So the daughter's not in the home anymore, is what I'm hearing.
Correct.
That person should be able to apply for a TANF child only grant for the child, because that is the big hangup, the parent's presence. So once they're out of the home for purposes of TANF, a grandparent should be able to get that TANF child only grant.
That's correct.
Are there any other questions? Any comments? If not, thank you so much. This was really good. And to those who are on the line, we have monthly Zoom meetings like this with different topics. So look for the invite on a monthly basis. We encourage you to get involved with the Ohio Grandparent Coalition. Every additional voice make the coalition stronger. We are constantly advocating for services for caregivers, blood and non-blood, who are having some challenges with the system, or just in terms of raising. I know respite is a major issue for those individuals who have children in their home. And I know right now with the kids being schooled from home is a major challenge for grandparents and other kin raising the children, just in terms of helping them to be able to do the online classes. And though I get a lot of questions about just trying to manage them in front of that, the monitor in terms of actually being homeschooled from home. And it's a challenge for a lot of grandparents who don't really have the background that can really help them on an ongoing basis with the schoolwork. So still have much work to do. You can also, again, go to our website. Everything that we do on a monthly basis, you will find it afterwards on the website, so you can listen to this again. You can also reach out to any of the officers who are attached to the coalition. Our information is also on the website. So when I say a shout out to Patrick. Patrick is very, very involved in the coalition. He was an officer previously, and so his voice is very strong when we talk about kinship and the good things that he's continued to do down in his area. So are there any questions or any comments from any of the officers before we terminate the Zoom meeting? If not, thank you so much, and we hope to see you next month. I'll look for our email and the topic, and have a good afternoon. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.